Okay, it's a weird text no matter what translation you read it in. Maybe that helped, maybe that didn't. At least it helps expand our imaginations a little bit. But a couple things to keep in mind. One is the stories that we read and that we hold as sacred and dear are 2,000 years old, right? They're a starting point for us. They're not a roadmap of what we want to follow, but a starting point for us to move forward together, as we've been talking about these last few weeks. The other thing to note is that this is a parable, okay? This is not meant to be a how-to guide for your investments, although maybe it's helpful in that way, I don't know. But it's meant to be, it's a parable. It's meant to challenge the way that we think. This is the point of the kind of stories, this genre that Jesus taught in. It's not meant to give us a bunch of answers to hold on to. It's meant to make us ask different questions, think about things in a different way. So while there's certainly a lot, hair in my mouth, there's a lot of scholarly tears and blood shed over this particular passage and what it means and what all the details are, and we can totally nerd out about that some other time. Today what I want to do is focus in on what's the question at the heart of the story. What is the perspective shift that Jesus is trying to present? And here it is. Here's the question it's leading us to, no matter which way you slice it. The question is, how do we take what God has given us and multiply it? How do we take what God has given us and grow it, expand it? Maybe you can think about that in terms of resources, in terms of money, in terms of your own spiritual gifts and talents, in terms of our church impact. What has God given us? Because God's gifts are abundant. And what can we do with that? How can we multiply that? Robin Wall Kimmerer, in her book Braiding Sweetgrass, that you've heard me tell lots of stories from in the last year, Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants. Isn't that lovely? Okay, thanks. She tells a story about being a little girl and about the gift of strawberries. Has anybody read this? I think the book club might have done this a couple years back. No? Oh, good. So it'll be a new story for you. The gift of strawberries. When she was a girl, wild strawberries grew in the fields behind her house. Now, this is foreign to me in Texas, but maybe we can think about, I don't know, prickly pear or bluebonnets or something like that. But wild strawberries grew, and she and her friends would go and pick the strawberries and eat them. Sometimes the white ones, they just couldn't wait until they were ripened up to take a bite. But when they were full grown, she says, you could smell them before you could see them. They're ready to eat. And it's this beautiful gift of the earth of strawberries. And she goes on to tell this story about how she started to notice that after all the strawberries were harvested, after the production was done, the plants that they spent so much time with in the June days of her childhood would send out little shoots, little runners, looking for new places to grow. And she and her siblings, her friends, noticed this, and they would start to clear out little paths for them. See a little shoot going this way, move some weeds, make it a little bit easier for that shoot to grow that direction. And sure enough, the plants responded to their gift, right? The strawberries gave the gift of the fruits, which created a relationship with the people that ate them, who then made a path for them to grow easier. The next June, the strawberry bushes or I don't know, what do strawberries grow on? Vines were bigger, and there was more of them, and they could see how their interaction with this gift provided even more. She talks about a similar situation with sweetgrass. Sweetgrass is this beautiful grass that's braided into baskets, very ornate baskets. If any of you have been to the powwow yesterday, you'll have seen them. It's also used in a lot of indigenous ceremony. And sweetgrass really only thrives in the places where there are communities using it. Now, you don't want to use too much because you can, get rid of all of it if you just scoop it all up to sell, at the market. But if you don't use it, it actually grows less, and eventually the colony of sweetgrass will go away. But where there is sweetgrass near communities who are picking responsibly, using that grass, it thrives. It thrives. You have to use that gift to make it multiply. The earth teaches us this in lots of ways. I know we have some gardeners here that could give even better illustrations. But I think this is a good picture of God's gifts. They create, just like the strawberries, just like the sweetgrass, they create a relationship with us, a relationship of gratitude and reciprocity and an opportunity to multiply the gift. Now, I know this is not totally foreign to you. When you give a gift, you want the person who received it to use it, right? You want them to make good use of it. If you give a kid a soccer ball, you don't want them to just put it in the closet and not do anything with it, right? The gift of the soccer ball is so much more than just a ball, right? It's an opportunity that provides health benefits, team building benefits. It encourages the joy of play and the persistence it takes to get better. So when you give a gift, you want it to multiply. It's not just a soccer ball, it's so much more than that, right? And if it sits in the closet, then it's useless. Same thing if maybe you give a friend a knitting kit. Okay, this came to my mind because I do have a knitting kit that someone gave to me that has been under my bed for decades, or at least a decade. So I'm a bad example of this, but I want to be aspirational in the idea of the knitting kit. It's moved to several different beds and been in that same spot underneath it with a half of a scarf created. But when you give your friend a knitting kit, you think, oh, this is going to bring joy to their life. They're going to have fun with this. They're going to learn something new. Maybe even if your friend is better than me, they'll give you a scarf back. It creates a relationship of reciprocity, of gratitude that can keep growing and building. When you give to church, you are not just giving to the offering plate to go put something in a safe, right? You're giving generously and with gratitude, knowing that and hoping that your gift keeps giving, right? Has an impact. That when we each bring our gifts together here, they can multiply miraculously. And that's what we're talking about at our budget meeting today. So worship and church conferences are totally connected, y'all. I'm telling you. I'll tell you every time. So gifts are not to hoard. They're not to just waste and use up, but they're to multiply. And this is kind of the picture that we get here. It's not totally foreign to us, but sometimes the way that our culture thinks, the way that our society thinks, makes it harder to see this on maybe a bigger scale than soccer balls and knitting kits, right? This is where I really think our indigenous teachers can help us to shift our mindset. Robin Wall Kimmerer, the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, talks about, in her chapter about strawberries, talks about the difference between the gift economy and the private property or the commodity economy. Right, so in the private property economy, everything is transactional, right? I go to Amazon, I buy a pair of socks, those socks are mine, right? And I can protect and guard what's mine. I protect my rights. The gift economy, everything is a gift. And the gift has a responsibility to keep moving. So the gift creates relationships between people. It creates bonds and memories and creates belonging among us. So an example with the sock could be the one that I bought on Amazon is mine. I've got the sock. I don't have any responsibility to anyone with that. In a gift economy, let's say that my grandmother knitted me a pair of socks, right? That's different, isn't it? It might look exactly the same as the, vintage wool socks that I buy on Amazon, but the socks that my grandmother knits for me and gives to me, that comes with a responsibility, right? I'm going to wear those when I go to her house, right? I'm going to keep those in a special place in the drawer, at least. And it comes with a response of gratitude. I'm responsible for connecting with her on that, right? It creates a memory. I just went to Riley's play, which was fabulous, on Friday night, which was all about, it was about socks and about how memories through gifts keep our relationships alive. It's beautiful. So in a gift economy, we ask, what's my responsibility? Who am I in a relationship with here? In a private property economy, which we have to live in all the time, right, we ask, what are my rights? What is mine, and how do I protect it? In a gift economy, with that perspective, we get to find belonging and meaning together. In a private property economy, we get to be reviewers on Amazon, right? We get to be the judge. And we can see those two kind of perspectives playing out in the story today, however we want to read it, right? We've got the first two people who take the gift that was given and recognize the responsibility and the opportunity that come with that and put that gift in motion. Then we've got the third guy who feels a lot of fear, who hides the talent or the horses away and protects them, and who wastes the gift, right? We see this play out in versions of religion all the time. Sometimes the way that our brains think economically can absolutely shape the way that we think about our spirituality. You see some churches with a really big focus on what Jesus did for me, that's mine, that no one can take away. And while that is not wrong, that can be a really clear focus in one direction. In another direction, we can think about what Jesus did for the world, what responsibility that gives us to our neighbor. See the two kind of competing perspectives that I'm talking about? Can I get a head nod? Y'all aren't the amening type, but okay, there we go. Thank you. We see it play out in our communities, right? With community members. Are people welcome as gifts into our community, or are they seen as strangers we need to be protected from? We see this in Texas all the time with our immigrant neighbors. We see this with our own children, right? It's not just those people over there that have this problem. We see it with our children. Are these little beings that I want to facilitate their growth wherever that takes them? Or are these little beings that I need to hide and protect from the world and keep just as they are and as I want them? That's hard, y'all. That's a hard tug-of-war in parents' hearts, for sure. We've got that tug-of-war going on in all of our hearts in all different kinds of ways, because receiving a gift as an invitation to growth, to relationship, requires risk. It's scary. We don't know the whole story of the parable. Maybe those first two guys started trading and lost some of the money or the horses first and kept going. Maybe they ended up where they were after. It was a long journey, right? The text says. So we don't know the ups and downs and the risks that they took to get there. It requires risks. It requires accountability. It requires faith, which is hard, y'all. But the good news is, this is the good news, I think, of this text, if there is any. And I think that there is. The good news is that we can multiply God's gifts, like you and us. We can do it. We can multiply God's gifts. We can grow in all kinds of ways. God is not done with us. God is not done with you, no matter your age, no matter what. You have potential and responsibility to grow the gifts that God has given you. We have potential and responsibility to grow and multiply the gifts that God has given us. The gifts do not need our protection. We don't need to hide them away from thieves. They need to expand. They need room to grow. I know that this is hard to believe. I know that thinking about growth and expansion is difficult for most churches, for sure, who've seen a lot of decline in many ways in the last 20, 30, 40 years. It's not just us. This is all over the place. And it's hard to believe when we're used to what we're used to, right? You're comfortable in your pew over there. Don't be talking to me about changing and expanding, Natalie, right? We've been through a lot, too, and I want to acknowledge that. You've been through a lot personally. This church has been through a lot. Growth and expansion and multiplicity feels out of reach a lot of times. Maybe you're a little bit burnt out. You've been hurt by the church before. Maybe you've worked really hard to protect what you have right now in this space, and you want to protect it. You want to make sure that it's safe. But the good news is that what we've worked so hard for is not our own. It's gift. It's gift. And there are lots of reasons to find ourselves in the mindset of that third guy in the story who wants to put the gift away, hide it away, protect it for all that it's worth until it, gets eaten away by moths or whatever. There are lots of reasons to believe that. And yet, look around. Look around. No, seriously, look around. Yeah. We're growing in all kinds of ways. You see faces that you haven't seen before. We have partnerships that are coming to the forefront in new ways. We're having impact at UT and at the Capitol in all kinds of ways that are expanding the gifts that God has already given us. Our gifts are already multiplying. So I know that we have these competing stories, right, about scarcity, about protection, and about the gifts that can be multiplied in ways that don't run you into the ground, I promise. We have these competing stories, so how can we lean into the good news? How can we lean into seeing the world as gift, seeing the world as a gift economy with gratitude and reciprocity and responsibility in multiplying this, rather than a kind of commodity economy where we just trade things out and keep things the way that they are? Think about your resources. Think about your money. How can we take what we have and grow its impact? How can we take what we have as a church and multiply our impact? This is an important question for us to ask. This is what our scripture is asking us to ask. How can you take your own personal gifts, the essence of who you are, your creativity, your penchant for exploration, your stable presence, your ability to be a person of prayer? What are the things that are unique to you? What are the gifts that you have? And how can you grow them? How can you multiply them? That's your responsibility here, to see and recognize the gifts that God has given you and to give them room to expand. Clear out the little pathways for those strawberry vines to grow. How do we grow and multiply God's gifts in the world? Maybe we can take this even beyond ourselves, beyond this congregation, and think about what are God's gifts in creation. You may not have a strawberry patch to tend to and grow, but you can probably plant a pollinator garden. I know some of you do. There are gifts of God that you can encourage to grow in the soil at your house, right? Plant a tomato plant with Pastor Milo and see what comes out of it. That's expanding the gifts of God. What about the gifts of humanity? Who are the voices that are gifts to our world, that our world needs to hear? How can you amplify those? A lot of times those gifted voices are pushed to the side. We can grow that gift by amplifying them, by making space for people at the table that haven't been invited before, and by following their lead, growing those gifts, right? Collaborating with people who are different than us, bridging those differences so that the body of Christ, the people of God, can start to recognize a hand and a hand are part of the same body, right? How can we do one thing to take a risk and bridge those differences? There's a million ways, there's a million examples, and I hope that you're starting to think about them, ways that we can multiply the gifts of God. But I want you to think of just one. What's one of your gifts? Maybe it's access to resources. Maybe it's some passion that is living in your heart. Maybe it's a skill that you have that God has given you. Does everybody have just one? Bring it to the forefront of your brain right now. What is it? Hospitality. Maybe you're an amazing chef. Like, it could be anything. What is one gift? I know that you are all treasure troves of fabulousness, but pick one. I know it's hard, and just bring it to the front of your mind. And think about that for a second. Recognize the gifts that God has given you. You are incredible. And you have a responsibility to be you, to grow who you are, to grow those gifted parts of you in the world. The world needs you. The church needs you to. So name that gift, recognize that gift, practice it right now, and ask yourself, what's one way, what's one thing you can risk to multiply that gift today? Today. We're not going to put this off to tomorrow, right? Think in your brain about that one gift that you have, and what's one risk you can take to make a path for it to grow. Just imagine. how you might multiply it. Or what's one perspective shift that would change how you think about the gift that God has given you? You got it? Everybody got your homework for the week? Yeah, good. Ready, set, grow, y'all. Beloveds, God is not done with us. God is not done with you. May we trust in the God who trusts us with so much, so much. And let's keep the gift moving, keep the gift growing. May it be so. Amen.